Today we're going to discuss our political heritage, which is basically some of the philosophers and some of the early documents that shaped the American government. Now, most of these were not actually American documents or American philosophers, but they were the ideas and the heritage from various other ways of thinking, like the Enlightenment thinking, that did come to influence the American system of government. So our goal is to describe the influence of the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment thinkers on the United States, so people like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu, and to describe the influence of historical documents on the American system of government. So looking at things like the Magna Carta or the English Bill of Rights or the English Petition of Rights and seeing how they shape the American government. So first, just to get us thinking, I want you to think about the idea of the American Revolution. Do you think it was okay that America decided to break away from Great Britain? Do you think it was okay that America said we don't want to be part of Great Britain anymore? And if so, was it a just war? And if the answer is yes, well, then the next question you have to think about is, how do you justify that? How do you justify breaking away from the country? Like, if you're going to break away from America today, how would you justify trying to overthrow the government? Now, I wouldn't recommend that you actually try to overthrow the government, but if you had to justify it, you'd have to have pretty good reason. And the reason that our founding fathers came up with were inspired by many of these Enlightenment thinkers that we're going to talk about. So we're going to look at the idea that there are rights out there that have been established, and that's what our founding fathers were trying to protect. So a couple of the main ideas. First of all, the idea of rule of law. Nobody in America is above the law. Not even the president, not even the politicians. Everybody from the richest of the rich to the poorest of the poor must follow the law. And the idea that people have inherent rights, natural rights, inalienable rights, as they're sometimes called, human rights, as they're sometimes called. We have this general belief in America that everybody has rights, and those rights are protected. But again, going back to this idea, where did we get this idea from? Where did these rights come from? And that is what the Enlightenment is going to tell us. So, as hopefully you know from world history, there was a movement mostly beginning in Europe, especially Great Britain, France, those kinds of areas, known as the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was a different way of thinking. Prior to the Enlightenment, if something good happened, if something bad happened, if anything happened, it was because of the power of God, because God wanted something to happen. So if you were blessed, it was because God was happy with you. If an earthquake struck you dead, it was because God was angry. And the Enlightenment is a different way of thinking. Instead of blaming or attributing everything to a God, it's the idea that through logic and reason, we can solve the problems of society. So it's all about logic and reason. And so if we look at Isaac Newton, his ideas of natural laws, he believed that there were laws, there were ways things happened that could control not just nature, but also politics, economics, justice, and religion. These are all things that had laws assigned to them. So this is where we come to the state of nature. We talked about the state of nature before. State of nature is what happens if there is no government. We said that if there's no government, if there's no rules, I'm going to try to get as much as I want, and that may mean harming or hurting you. You're going to try to get as much as you want. That may mean hurting or harming me. And so in a state of nature, in a world without any government, we know that life is nasty, brutish, and short. We know that we're going to take advantage of the situation. And so the idea behind forming a government is that we're going to give up some rights in order to gain some freedom. In a state of absolute freedom, we know that yes, we may be free, but we're always looking over our shoulder, always worrying about whether or not somebody is going to hurt or harm us. So Thomas Hobbes, one of the early Enlightenment thinkers who influenced the American government, was a guy named Thomas Hobbes. In 1651, he wrote a famous book known as the Leviathan. You won't need to know the name of that, but you will need to know that Thomas Hobbes started out the Leviathan by talking about what life was like if we didn't have government, what life was like in the state of nature. Life was nasty, brutish, and short, because people were always trying to kill each other and steal each other's stuff. Without a government, things were not organized. There was simply mass chaos. And he also believed that people were inherently selfish and greedy. People were going to do the wrong thing. They always wanted to have power, and because of this desire for power, because of this desire to be the one in charge, that meant that life was often filled with lots of people trying to take advantage of each other. So Thomas Hobbes proposed a solution. He said that people should give up some of this power in order to form a social contract. A contract, an agreement, between people, society. So people would come together and they would form a contract. They would agree that they were going to give up some of their freedom. I'm going to give up the freedom to punch you. You give up the freedom to punch me. And in return, what we're going to gain is an organized society. We're not going to have to look over our backs while we're sleeping because we know that we have safety and security around us. Now, Thomas Hobbes actually didn't believe in democracy. He thought that the best way to control the government, the best way to have order within society, is to give up control, give up power to a monarch, to an absolute monarch. So he thought that if one person was given all the power, that was the best way to organize society. In 1690, a philosopher named John Locke wrote a book called Two Treatises on Government. Locke will expand on some of the ideas of Thomas Hobbes, but he has a little bit different view of society. He believes that people are shaped by the environment around them, that they are a tabula rasa, that they are a blank slate. And he believes that people generally, when they are a blank slate, they're going to do the right thing. He believes, he's got a little bit more faith in humanity to do what is right, to do what is moral. He also believes that people are born with natural rights. He says that everybody has the right to life, to liberty, and to property. Not the pursuit of happiness, that will come later, but originally John Locke said that people have the right to life. People should never be able to kill you without your permission. You have the right to liberty, freedom, and you have the right to property. Nobody should ever be able to take away these things from all people. And so he was a firm believer that governments existed to protect these rights, the rights of life, liberty, and property, that government was there to make sure that the people's rights weren't violated. And he firmly believed that if government isn't protecting those rights, if government isn't doing what it's supposed to do, then the people have the right to overthrow the government. And this is going to be where a lot of the justification for the Declaration of Independence comes from. American colonists will say, hey, our rights are not being protected by the government. We need to get a new government. That brings us to Rousseau. Rousseau had this famous quote, man is born free, but everywhere is in chains. And again, this is referring to the state of nature. Without a government, people just had mass chaos. They had to worry about getting hurt. And so Rousseau expanded on the ideas of Hobbes and Locke, and he wrote a book called The Social Contract. And he said in the social contract that people should be the source of government. People are the ones who form their government. And that government is a mutual contract between the people and the ruler. And that government should exist only for the purpose of protecting natural rights, only for the purpose of protecting people, their lives, and their properties. Now, he believes that there should be some government intervention. He doesn't believe that the government should not exist. He thinks the government should exist, but they should only do what they actually have to do. And he believes that this government should be chosen by the people, or what today we would know as democracy. So Rousseau is suggesting not only should we have a government, not only should that government not be an absolute monarchy, but that government should be selected by the people. That government should be chosen by the people. And Baron de Montesquieu does a good job of explaining why the government should be chosen by the people. Montesquieu, in his book Spirit of the Laws, went out and he reviewed all kinds of historical governments. He looked at what was being done in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. He looked at modern governments, and he said the big problem with governments that fail, where people eventually become so fed up with the government, is because of the absolute monarch. He said monarchs usually try to take too much control. For example, in the British system, the king was the one who made the laws. And he enforced the laws, and he interpreted the laws, and he said that this led for way too much corruption. And so Montesquieu's idea is that in order to avoid corruption, we need to have a separation of powers and checks and balances. So the people who make the laws should be different from the people enforcing them, which should be different from the people interpreting them. And each of those branches of government, each of those functions, should have the right to check up or check on the other to make sure that they're not violating them. to make sure that the people's rights aren't being violated. So to summarize, Thomas Hobbes believed in the idea of natural rights, protecting your life, liberty, and property. Thomas Hobbes believed in a social contract. People should come together in order to protect their needs within society. Rousseau believed in direct democracy. He said that by giving people the power, they would be able to best protect their rights. And Montesquieu believed in a separation of powers. He said that we shouldn't give all the powers and all the duties to one person. So that brings us to some of the key documents that influenced the American system of government. These are mostly British documents. They were written long before the United States came about. In fact, a couple of them were written long before 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So the first document we're going to talk about is the Magna Carta. It was written in 1215. If you go on the close-up trip to Washington, D.C., we could see an original copy of the Magna Carta at the National Archives. So the Magna Carta was basically forced upon King John. John, the King of England at the time, was pretty abusive of the people, and one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to become wealthier, so he raised taxes, and he raised them again, and he raised them again, and he raised them again. Now, this was all good as long as it was just poor people he was raising taxes on, but eventually he started to raise taxes on the barons, some of the wealthy people in society, and they got pretty ticked off. In fact, they got so ticked off that they were about to overthrow the king, they were about to kill the king, and they basically told the king, either you're going to agree to the Magna Carta, or you're going to lose all your power. So needless to say, the king, as you might imagine, eventually says, yeah, sure, I guess I'll sign the Magna Carta, I guess I'll agree to whatever you want, because he wanted to keep his power, and more importantly, he wanted to keep his life. So he signs the Magna Carta, which becomes the official British law in 1215. And so some of the things that the Magna Carta does, it recognizes ancient liberties for all free men, an idea found in the Declaration of Independence. Fancy way of saying this is natural rights. It limits the king's ability to raise funds, Article 1, Section 7 and 9 of the Constitution. What does this mean? It means that the king can't just raise taxes whenever he wants to. He needs to get permission in order to do that. It protects due process of law. It says before the people go on trial, before people go to jail, they have to have a trial by jury. They have to have some rights that are protected, and we can find these in the American Bill of Rights, the 5th through 8th Amendment. And it also states the idea of majority rule, the early forms of a democratic republic, the early forms of a democracy, saying that the people, and in this case the barons, would be the ones who decide much of the rule. So when it comes to the Magna Carta, essentially it establishes this concept that we've been talking about, rule of law, the idea that nobody is above the law, the idea that nobody can violate the law, whether you're the richest of the rich or the poorest of poor. Now, to be fair, as much as the Magna Carta sounded all cute and pretty, it was never actually enforced. It was never actually enacted the way that it was written. Basically, the king just stopped taxing the rich people, and they got over it for a while. But even though the Magna Carta was never actually enforced the way that it was meant to be, it becomes the basis for all of British law. It becomes the basis on which the British system of form of government is created, which is also going to be used when our founding fathers start to say, hey, the British are violating our laws. They're violating our rights found in the Magna Carta. Look, we can go back 600-700 years and find that these rights were granted to us, and now the king isn't following those rights. And so when they justified overthrowing the British government in the American Revolution, they used the Magna Carta as a big piece of that. Next document we're going to look at is the Mayflower Compact of 1612. The Mayflower Compact established what was known as a civil body politique. What does that mean? Well, there's all these people who are going aboard the Mayflower. They're coming to the New World, and they know that they're going to be thousands of miles from the British system, the British courts, the British everything, and so they knew that they were going to have to agree to protect each other, and they were going to have to agree to respect each other's rights. And so basically the Mayflower Compact says, yeah, we're still British. We know we're still British, but when we're over in the colonies, we're going to be so far away, we're going to have to govern ourselves. We're going to have the right to govern ourselves because relying on the British system thousands of miles away is not practical. And so for all intents and purposes' sake, this is the first social contract that's formed in America. Next, the English Petition of Rights of 1628. This again is going to go a little bit further in limiting the power of the monarch. If you're noticing a trend here, the king, the monarch in British history, generally tends to abuse power from time to time, and the people want to step up and put him in check. And so one of the things that the English Petition of Rights did is it says that the British government is going to have a representative government. It's going to have a parliament, which is selected by the people, and they're going to help the king rule. So again, this idea of consent of the governed, the idea that the permission of the people are going to select who's going to govern them. They're going to select their own parliament. And the Petition of Rights also says, by the way, king, you can't get involved in our elections. You can't rig our elections. You can't threaten us. You have to let us have free and fair elections so we can choose who we want to represent us. It also talked about the idea of ordered government, different offices, different positions within the government. This is some of the early ideas of Montesquieu, separation of powers, checks and balances. The English Petition of Rights also protected the rights of the people. It says that Parliament, the people who were selected by the people, social contract, they had to approve any increases in taxes. They also were protected against cruel and unusual punishment. That was becoming a big problem in Great Britain at the time, and so people wanted to make sure that those rights were protected. That brings us to the English Bill of Rights of 1689. The English Bill of Rights, once again, the king was kind of abusing the rights. People got ticked off over it. People threatened to overthrow or kill the king. And so the king was once again forced to give up even more of his power. And the king was forced to give up power to make Parliament even stronger. Some other things that were protected in the English Bill of Rights, the idea of due process. So going back to the Petition of Rights, we're going to see an expansion on this to include not only a trial by jury, but also no cruel and unusual punishment, no excessive fines or bail. You have the right to bear arms. That means you have the right to carry a gun. You have the right to petition the government, which is a fancy way of saying complaining to the government. If you're not happy, you are protected with the right to complain to the government. In 1776, we get the Virginia Declaration of Rights. It was written by a gentleman named George Mason. And even though the Virginia Declaration of Rights was only for Virginia, basically a lot of the things that we find in the American Constitution, a lot of the rights that were protected in the Bill of Rights, they're outlined in the Virginia Declaration of Rights. So the ideas that came together at the Constitutional Convention, they didn't come out of nowhere. Many of them came from the Magna Carta, the English Petition of Rights, the English Bill of Rights, and those were included in the Virginia Declaration of Rights. So if we look at this chart, you can go right by right, and you can see what was included in the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and the American Bill of Rights of 1791. And you can see a lot of those rights weren't anything new. Basically, the document plagiarized off of previous documents. Our founding fathers were just trying to protect the rights that they believed that they already had. So when we declare our independence, we're not making up these brand new rights out of nowhere. We're not just saying, oh, we think we have these rights because we feel like them. We're actually citing historical precedent. We're citing other cases where the English have already said, look, these are your rights. They are protected. And then we're going to talk about how those rights were violated. So the Declaration of Independence will essentially say, look, government didn't protect any of these rights, therefore we have the right to form a new government. The final thing that we're going to talk about, a little bit unrelated to all these documents, but it is a historic document from the 1500s, from the 16th century, the Iroquois Confederation. Basically, there were 5 Native American tribes living in what is now the Northeast and Midwest of the United States, and they often fought among each other. It didn't create a lot of unity. It created a lot of problems, and they eventually decided that if they came together, if they united, that they could create peace within America, peace within the idea in the area that they controlled. And what's important about this is that when our founding fathers come over, when they come over with the ideas of the Mayflower Compact, and when they start to look at some of the other early documents, they see that democracy can work in America. They see how these 5 Native American tribes, united around the Iroquois Confederation document, they see how they managed to live in peace, and they say, look, we could do this too. If we work together, if we self-govern each other, we could live in peace in the colonies as well. And so this is where the early ideas for the truest forms of democracy in America come from. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and our next lesson will look at the Declaration of Independence, and we'll eventually take a look and see how these historic documents and how these philosophers have shaped the American Declaration of Independence and the American Bill of Rights.